couple of times just so that people are reminded. Okay, so first, how are we doing? Remember, one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is, work a little bit pretty much every day on this material. You don't want to have Friday be your one day to be thinking about this stuff, mainly because so much of the work we do is about developing skills, right? So there's skills that you already have, but you are now formalizing them, okay? And you're formalizing them through systematic study. And what can often happen when you're formalizing a skill you already have, you can get sort of thrown off balance, right? So for example, any of you who, let's say you play a sport and, suppose that you start working with a new coach and the new coach starts working with you on a new technique, you might, exhibit your skills pretty poorly because you're trying to reconfigure, right? Retrain your body. No different here. Okay. Similarly with, playing a musical instrument, whatever. Okay. So please, please, please be sure to practice. Remember, there is a workbook and answer keys. And if you want to chat about the practice, I'm here, whether it's during office hours or outside of office hours. Okay. So first, questions about, what we were working on last week. We were working specifically on the categorical syllogism. And remember, because I'm not always the best at tracking the Zoom tiles. If you raise your hand, I might not see you, especially if we get more people in the room than I can fit on a single screen, then I'd have to toggle. So if you've got a question, problem, confusion, comment, just speak up or feel free to use the chat. I do have the chat window open and ready to go. Okay, so reminder, I've moved exam 2. I think I also moved exam 3 to give you some more time. But also as a reminder, due dates are there to keep you on track, right? So look at the schedule, see where we are with due dates. But deadlines are when a link closes. What I've done purposefully, although I know it in some ways it means you have less of a sort of scheduling crutch than you would otherwise. I've told you about due dates in the schedule, right, in the syllabus and in our, weekly to-do items, but I don't mark those in the calendar. So it's not like Brightspace alerts you, right? So you've got to keep on track with your due dates, but the deadlines are different. Deadlines are when an item closes. I've kept those open for quite a long time with respect to quizzes and exams because I don't know what your schedules are like. I don't know what sorts of pressures you're under. I trust that you'll keep yourselves, on track as much as possible. So if you're late getting a quiz in, if you're late getting an exam in, no problem, right? The discussions, I'd like you to be stay as much on track as possible so that I can give you feedback. Speaking of discussions, I apologize. I'm late. I'm reading you only today from last week back. Sorry about that, but I am getting it done today. Okay, so exam 2 was originally scheduled to be completed this week. We're pushing it to next week because we've got some more stuff that we want to cover together. But remember, you've got to work on your own as if you're working a regular online class in between our meetings because we can't cover everything we need to cover in a single meeting. Okay? Let me know if you have questions. All right, so here's where we are. We're working on 2 methods to test a categorical syllogism for validity. All right, so let me restate this. We talked about one method last week, but we'll review it this week. So 2 methods of testing a categorical syllogism for validity. And as usual, my board work is terrible. I ran out of room. I'm abbreviating categorical syllogism as CATSIL. Okay, so one Venn diagrams. Right? And remember, the Venn diagram is a visual representation of a statement's, a proposition's logical structure. The diagram for a categorical syllogism is the visual representation of validity or invalidity, which is kind of cool. The other method we have is the rules of the syllogism. And my plan or my thought is this. We're going to talk about the rules together this week, but you should consult, in chapter 3, you see the rules are provided. They're also provided in the appendix. The chapter 3 appendix is your friend, remember, because it's a handy set of charts and rules, right, and diagrams to get you thinking about and to support your thinking about. I should say it's not really there to get you thinking about it. It's there to support your thinking and work on this material. Okay, so let's start with the Venn diagrams as a review. Venn diagrams. So you always diagram only the premises. Why is that? Because when we diagram the premises, if in diagramming the premises the conclusion appears, right, that means the conclusion is contained in, entailed by the premises, hence the argument is valid. If the diagram doesn't contain the display, the conclusion, the argument is invalid. Okay, there are some other features to consider. I'll jot them down, but you know, I want to make sure that we spend more time learning by doing. Okay, if one premise is a particular claim, diagram the universal premise first. If it is, oops, sorry, let me rephrase this. If you're not forced to diagram an X for a particular claim within a circle, place it on the line. And we'll see that, you know, play out. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do I'm going to assume that you're already comfortable with what we were working on to date, specifically last week. You're comfortable having worked through some of the chapter. You know, for example, that what I'm about to write is the standard form version of a categorical syllogism. So there's no content here, it's just structure. So let's take this. All middle term are major term. Remember, your middle term is the repeated term. It's the term that's repeated in the premises. And we abbreviate that or symbolize that with capital M. We know also that the predicate of the conclusion is your major term, and that goes in the major premise. I'll jot this down. All middle term are major term. Notice that the middle term happens to be the subject of the premise, of the first premise. Then we have some minor term are middle term, and then the conclusion. So some minor term are major term. So as a reminder, the subject of your conclusion is the minor term. The predicate of your conclusion is the major term. And don't forget that your SMP in a syllogism, as part of the syllogism structure, the SMP refers to, respectively, minor, middle, major terms. But in terms of an individual proposition, the M can be, for example, I'll just briefly highlight this with color. The middle term can be in the subject position, or it can be in the predicate position, right? The minor term can be in the subject position, or it can be in the predicate position. So bear this in mind when you're thinking. You want to toggle between thinking about your syllogisms structure and the parts of the syllogism as parts of the syllogism versus the parts of the syllogism as parts of individual categorical proposition claims. This is what I mean about taking what you do every day, right, and formalizing it and studying that formalization through a system. It may throw you off balance. You don't run around all day thinking about categorical syllogisms. I know it, you know it. But when we train our minds through this particular study and through other studies in this course, we are in the process of training our minds how to extract the salient features of complicated arguments, right? How to follow and evaluate, reformulate, right? So it's not like we're doing this stuff on a daily basis, but we're practicing to do what we do every day. Okay, so we've got our argument in standard form. So let me just note that. Whoops. Standard form. Major premise is first. The major premise contains the the major premise contains the major term. The minor premise contains the minor term. Hannah, what are you thinking?
I was just wondering, so I was doing the reading yesterday, and I was a little confused. Is this like, if I'm making an argument, is it almost a form of me putting the major term first, then the minor term?
Yes.
The major term, how it relates to the standard form, and then the minor term.
Right. So when you're given an argument, you know, and I know that our go-to strategy for figuring out what we've got when we are given an argument is find the conclusion. And we do that here, right? So obviously this argument's already in standard form, but we look at the conclusion, and the subject, the grammatical subject or the subject class of the conclusion is our minor term. The predicate class, the grammatical predicate of our conclusion, is the major term. And then we put those elements in their respective position. So, you know, major premise contains the major term. Minor premise contains the minor term. And then, you know, the middle term is repeated. Have I answered your terrific question?
You did. But do you think, like, maybe not this class, but like next class, we can get an example through, maybe if we get like an article or something?
Yeah. Because remember, what we are doing in this formalization of our kind of ordinary ways of reasoning is we're taking a skill that we have, but we just haven't formally studied before, and we're what's the word? There's a word I want. I apologize, I can't think of it. But we're like pushing our skill through a formal formalization process and a systematic study, so that we basically have, when we're done, you know, an orderly system sorry, let me rephrase that. I'll call it a complete system with an orderly process for dealing with arguments. And it just makes the sort of the much less structured experience of reading or listening. More often than not, it's the listening to an argument that involves an unstructured process, right? We're able to kind of map our skill set onto sort of, arguments in our daily lives. Okay. Yeah, and they abound. In fact, I just last night, not for this class, but for another class, I saw an example of what's known as proof by cases, right? So the person was, it was some op-ed. It had something to do with political life, and it was, look, whether Biden is the president or Trump is the president. We've got a migration crisis, right? So the person was arguing basically that neither Biden nor Trump caused the migration crisis. The migration crisis is a complicated issue involving, social, political, environmental, like climate change, environmental issues in South America and Latin America, right? So they're saying, look, in whether it's this or it's this, in either case, this is the outcome. And I can take that real life example and I can map it onto what's known in symbolic logic as a proof by cases, right? We can do that here. So yeah, definitely, Hannah. And I'll go ahead and grab some examples. I'll post them also on Brightspace. Okay. All right. So we've got our argument. Notice that the argument does contain one universal premise and one particular premise. So what that means is we're going to diagram the universal premise first, right? Does that make sense? And I hope that as we go through the diagramming process, you'll say, yes, I see why it makes sense. Now, per my usual, I've run out of whiteboard room, so hold tight. So here's the original. Okay, now let's start as a review by diagramming the subject class, middle term class relationship. Then we're going to move forgive me, I misspoke after telling you that we're going to do the universal first. Sorry, forgive me. We're going to work first the middle term, major term first. Now, why am I drawing the circles like, sort of diagonally? Well, when they come together, we end up with this. Okay, so that you can see what's what, we'll make the middle term green. I forgot to, right? And let's make the subject term blue. And let's make I said subject term, but minor term blue. And let's make the major term or the predicate class of the conclusion red. Okay, so first, we already know how to diagram a universal affirmative. And let's go ahead and stipulate that we're working the modern interpretation, which means we do not assume existential import. We do not assume that the universal affirmative claim, all MRP, has at least one member of the subject class, which happens to be the middle term. Okay? Remember, as with like playing any game or, learning some new, instrument or whatever, there are rules, right? So we've got game pieces, they've got names, we've got rules, and then we follow them. Now, I recognize that for some of us, the learn by doing, just naming the game pieces, naming the rules, and then playing the game, that doesn't work for us. We need to understand what the game pieces mean and what the rules mean and why we have these rules. So, I try to toggle back and forth between those two approaches to presentation. But ask yourself, what sort of learner am I? Am I a learn by doer, or do I need to kind of get the theoretical stuff down first? Or if not the theoretical, do I need to get the conceptual stuff down first? There's no right way to learn, right? And sometimes we toggle ourselves as learners. Okay, so what do we know then? All MRP, that means that whatever M's there are, and we're not saying there are any, we're not assuming existential import, where are they? They're dumped in the P class. Now, let me go ahead and slide this diagram into its full syllogistic diagram representation. So notice what I'm doing here. I ignore the S class because the diagram that is at issue right now is the MP relationship, right? So the S class doesn't have anything to do with it. So I ignore the line having that demarcates the S class. This also, I hope, helps you make sense of why you don't diagram a particular claim first. Because if, let's say, I put an X in that area of the SM overlap, then I'd have to undo that X because now I've got a shade over it. Does that make sense? So let me give you an example. I'm sorry. The dogs are about to eat breakfast, so it's a very exciting time. I'll yell over the dogs. All right. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Suppose that I diagrammed the particular claim first, some S or M. I would put an X here, right? But if I put an X here and then I pull this diagram over, oh no, right? Isn't it true that now I put the X right in the middle, but now that area is shaded, and shading tells me there's no there. There's no, when you shade, you're saying this split space is not available for anything to be placed. Okay? So we diagram the universal first so that we don't have to erase and rediagram. Okay, so just a quick question. How are we doing? What do we think? And remember, don't worry about a formal, raising of the hand. Just speak up or type in the chat because I can't get everybody on the same display. How are we doing?
Real quick, do you think you can give us like a quick example of each like group? Like, what would you define as like an M or like an S or a P?
Right. So are you asking Hannah about this? Hold on just one second. If I go back to the original board, does it make sense that we're calling, when we look at, so going back to your original question, when we look at the conclusion, the subject class of the conclusion we call the minor term, and that S is the same in its premise. What I mean by the same in its premise is the minor term appears in the premise, right? Here the two are, right? The M, or sorry, let me do the P first. The P, as we said, in the conclusion is the major term, the predicate. We keep the P, and now the major term just happens to be the predicate also of its relevant or corresponding claim, right? So what we're saying is in a syllogism, so let's clarify. S is the minor term, and it can appear in the subject position or the predicate position of its corresponding premise. P is the major term, and M is the middle term. And the middle term, remember, is the term that's repeated. So we want to remember, toggle back and forth between interpreting a categorical proposition as a proposition. It's got a subject class, a predicate class, right? And interpreting that proposition within the context of the syllogism as a whole, which means that the subject class and the predicate class of a given syllogism is going to be, depending on where it's placed in the syllogism, is going to be major term, minor term, middle term. Is that what you're after in asking that terrific question?
That is, and I get it, but it's still a little confusing. I think I just need to like work on it a little bit.
It is confusing. Most of us think about so in all, like, I'm genuinely asking you this question. All of you, how many of you have been, forced to or wanted to, let's say, play a game, a sport, soccer, football, tennis, I don't know, or dance? I keep saying I'm going to finally take ballet classes. Why? Because I'm like, because of my physical background, the stuff I grew up doing, I am just so uncoordinated when it comes to doing something like, dance. Or, somebody the other day said they play drums. There's no freaking way that I could. I don't know how to do you're supposed to do this while you're doing something different with no, can't do it. Now, can't do it because I haven't practiced. How many of you have had a similar experience where, you know your body, you know how to walk and talk and move, but how many of you have tried to do something new and suddenly you're totally like the most uncoordinated person in the universe? At least that's how it feels. How many?
Definitely me.
Yeah. Yep. Anybody else? Okay. Well, John has bravely said yes, definitely me. So John and everyone else, please think, just humor me for this course and say, you know what? That feeling that I've had where I am physically uncoordinated, or suppose it's a feeling of physical weakness. I know particularly at your age, you're thinking, what physical weakness? I'm strong. I've got sort of, brute strength, the brute strength of youth. But, think about it this way. How many of you can just, apropos of nothing, decide you're going to pick up a dumbbell that's 300 pounds? No. You don't have the physical strength because you haven't built it up. So, coordination, strength. If you say that, if like John, you say, yes, I've experienced this in my own body, right? What makes you think that logic is something different? It's the same thing. You got to practice it. You got to build the strength. You got to master, your intellectual coordination. And it just takes practice. That's all. Look, the class mantra, folks, is if I can do it, if Mia can do it, anybody can do it. Nobody was worse at this than I was. So it's not about your intellectual aptitude. It's not about you being smart. You're all smart. You're all capable, right? Whether or not you're interested is one thing, right? You might say, yeah, I'm taking the class because I have to, and then I'm going to move on to other things. And so you might not get very good at this if you're not super interested in it. But if you practice away at it, it does yield. Maybe not right away, but it does. Okay, so bear that in mind. So Hannah, you're exactly right when you say, "Oh, I just got to practice more." I get discombobulated. If you're feeling discombobulated, that's the intellectual version, I think, of being physically uncoordinated. All right, so now let's move on to our diagram of the minor premise. Some SRM. We know already that we're putting the X here. Now, here's the question, folks. We've got a teeny tiny space available, don't we? Let's look at the SM area of overlap. Here it is. We are ignoring the P class because that's not relevant, right? We're going to put our X right here, and I'm sorry that my my diagramming, per usual, is craptastic. Hold on, I'm gonna fix this up. I'm gonna make it better. Right, so and then we put the blue on it. And that was green. Okay. Oh my gosh, you guys, I did it a freaking again. Here, hold on. I'm just going to draw these over again. Blah, 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 blah. I'm going to make it good. It's going to be really pretty. Okay. M. S. P. And we rediagram. Oh, much better. Okay. And I promise I wasn't just trying to waste your time. You've had a little bit of time to think about this. And now I've given you more visual room to see what we're doing. Since this, so the area of the SM overlap, right, is here. So since the green shaded part of the SM overlap area is not available to us, where must we put our blue X? Does the question make sense? And if so, tell me. Where are we going to put that X? Oh, by the way, did everybody see the group chat that John sent about a group chat for working together on this course? Okay, tell me where to put the X.
Would you put it in that like upper middle triangle thing? I don't know how to explain.
I know. So let me do this. Great point, John. Here's what I'm going to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So yeah, beautiful, John. In 4. Let's do it. Okay, so the X goes in. And of course, I can't erase one thing without screwing up something else. Okay, so now we're done. We've diagrammed. Remember, we diagram all and only our premises. When we're done, we stop. Question. Sorry, say again.
Oh, MRP. Why isn't the middle part for the P filled in on that upper, like not in the where like all of them interlap?
Yeah.
For the top right.
Yes. Well, remember, if all MRP were by shading the area of M outside of P, we're saying there can't be anything here. So any M's there may be, and we're not saying there are any because we're using the modern interpretation, any M's there might be, they're all dumped into the P class.
I gotcha.
Right? So John, great question. It's a great place for us to review. Think about remember our nested circles? Here are the M's, they're all in P. The Venn diagram is a version of that, if you will. Does that make sense? What do we think?
A little bit. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so here's what you're looking at, folks. So now let's take one more pair of circles. Let's take the conclusion. And for the sake not of anything other than cross-checking our work, what happens if we diagram the conclusion, some S or P? We have an X in the SP overlap area, correct? So now let's look at the SP overlap area. Do we have an X in the SP overlap area? Yes or no? Is anybody thrown off by the blue line? I'm asking you though to look at just what I highlighted in black.
Could you explain it a little more?
Yes.
Just clarify.
Yep. So first, is everybody clear about the fact that we're taking our standard diagram techniques and employing them here? So remember, the A proposition always gets diagrammed in the modern interpretation as follows, right? Area of S outside of P shaded. Universal negative. Area of the S and P overlap shaded. Particular affirmative. Area of SP overlap X. Particular negative. Area of SP, the area of S outside of P, X. So take a look at the conclusion. It's an I claim, right? And I've gone ahead and diagrammed the I claim. And now the question is this: does this diagram appear in the Venn for the syllogism? And so what I did is I highlighted the SP area of overlap, right? So basically we're now ignoring M. M has dropped out of the picture. And we're looking, when we diagram our premises, we look at the conclusion and we ask, does the conclusion appear? Is it true that there is an S that's also a P? Is it true that some S are P? And what does your intellectual gut say? Yes. The argument is valid. Now, I can all but guarantee you, again, remember, I am probably the worst logician ever. Sort of, I can give you all the reasons why, right? But I've just worked really hard, and now, it makes sense. And it makes sense partly because there are really two reasons for me personally. One was, I just kept seeing it over and over and over again because, I was a philosophy major, and if I'm in grad school, I'm a teaching assistant. And then if I want a job teaching, I better do this work because this is bread and butter, coursework. Right? So I just see it again and again and again. But also if I'm going to present it to somebody, because I'm supposed to be the professional, right? I better know what I'm talking about. So I'd work all sorts of ways I'd read a lot and I'd practice and I would think about what it is I'm confused about and how to make sense of it for myself. Because if I don't understand it, I can't share it with you. Okay, so you want to put yourself in the role of teacher, right? What do I need to do to be able to teach somebody about this? And that's just going to make your skill set shine even more. I mean, think about this. How many of you, whether you've worked, let's say, as a summer camp counselor, or you you do some maybe you're a personal guys, leave it. It's okay. You do some personal training, whatever it is, right? You have to think about what you're doing in order to present it to somebody. So that's what's going to happen here. So I can all but guarantee you, if you're not thinking about this stuff during the week, on Friday, it's like you're starting over again. Okay? Same with physical activity. If I don't exercise pretty much every day, if I go like 4 days, I start to lose my muscle strength, right? Okay, so let's carry this over to another whiteboard and let's talk about validity. Okay, so the argument is valid because when we diagram the premises, we thereby diagram the conclusion. The conclusion appears, in other words, when we correctly diagram the premises. Okay? Now let's look at an example of an invalid argument. So I'm going to carry over the last example. What happens when the argument is invalid? All right, so valid argument. I'm going to do it again. By the way, folks, it's a great idea to have a system and a procedure. Actually, let me back out of that sentence. It's a great idea to have a carefully worked out procedure or set of procedures for testing an argument for validity. There are 256 permutations of the categorical syllogism. Right? That might, if you're looking at 256 arguments, right? You can't just eyeball each one of them and say, "Yep, that looks valid. Nope, that looks invalid." Having a process, right? A method is going to be very useful to you in dealing with the evaluation concept, right? So remember so here was the original argument. So all MRP, some SRM, some SRP. By the way, we can just put this argument, we can also restate or represent the argument in this way. You'll see this in the textbook, and I'll want you to look it up because it's another way to present the standard form of an argument. Hey, Walt or Ed, no, you cannot chew on the cable. Leave it. Sorry, one of my dogs is chewing on the power cable. So this is an AII, right? So that's the mood of the argument, so-called, where we just look at the proposition type, right? So here's an A proposition, an I proposition, an I proposition. And then the mood or the figure of the argument is the placement of the middle term. So this is an AII figure 1. So look that up in the text. You'll want to, be conversant with that. We can talk about it a bit next week, but next week I want to focus, because we will write our exam, I want you to make sure you're working forward into the natural deduction material, which we will review on Friday. Okay, so all MRP. some S are M, therefore some S are P. So that's valid. Now let's look at an invalid argument. So we will make this all P are M, some S are M, some S are P. And here the mood and figure are as follows. It's again AII, but the figure is 2. And you'll see the mood and figure chart not only in the in chapter 3, but also in the chapter 3 appendix. Okay, so mood and figure are just shorthand ways of presenting standard form, right? So you're not writing out the whole argument. Okay, so here again we've got a set of Venn circles, and we're going to do the same Venn diagramming work that we did earlier. We're going to diagram the universal first, not because it's first in appearance in the argument, but because there is the minor premise is a particular claim. So all P are M. Well, this time we're diagramming the PM relationship where the P is distributed into the M, whereas in the previous example, the M was distributed into the P. And I'm using that word distribution on purpose because that's another concept that we want to think about. When we're talking about distribution, we're talking about exhausting a class. In other words, the entirety of the P class is exhausted into or is put into the M class. Or in the first example, it's the entirety of the M classes distributed into the P class. All right, now some S are M. Here's the SM area of overlap. And since I don't know if the S that's an M is also a P, I put it on the line. It's toggling. Maybe the S that's an M is a P, maybe it's not. And since the conclusion may be diagrammed, maybe not, we just don't know, right? The argument is invalid. So let me try to make this a little bit clearer because we've only got a couple minutes left, right? So the SM relationship, right, is this. The problem is that when the P comes in, suppose that the X is in the SM area of overlap that is not part of P. Now we can see that the conclusion just does not appear. It's not true that some S are P. There is not an X in the SP overlap area. But it's possible we could diagram it this way. I'm probably going to mess this up because I'm running out of room. It's possible that the X is here, right? We just don't know. The diagramming of the premises does not force us to diagram the conclusion. Hence, the argument is invalid. Okay, with just barely a minute left, I hope that if you're feeling discombobulated, that you don't just say, forget this and go off and do something else. Now is the time to see me for help. I'm begging you. I'm here for you. Right? I'm here during office hours. I'm here outside of office hours. Yes, I have other classes going on, but it doesn't, and I know you have other things going on, but it doesn't mean that we can't find a time to meet. So if you're confused, right, a great way to start clearing up that confusion is to have us meet. And then also don't forget, Hannah, I think it's Hannah, has taken charge of creating a chat group for everyone. So you guys can meet and brainstorm and commiserate and celebrate the work. Okay? So let me know if you have questions, problems, confusions. Otherwise, I will see you at 9 o'clock next week. All right? And I'll post the notes here, and I'll also post the video. Have a good one, everybody.